So we're going to talk about gender and culture now a little bit here and just hint at some of the issues that people have brought up with this, that feminists and others bring up. Um, so again, the idea is that gender is separate from sex in a way. This idea didn't really come into play until the 1960s, and people started to define gender as social expectations for the behaviors of male and females and the images that we come up with for ourselves based on those expectations. So it has to do with society and culture and not really so much with biology. So gender expectations these are some examples. Women are expected to fill nurturing roles and embody feminine traits and dress in a feminine way. So, you can look at the examples for this. And then men are supposed to present themselves as the opposite by fulfilling these masculine roles as just protector and manly traits. So it's supposed to be not only that women are supposed to do certain things and men, and they're supposed to look certain ways, but that they're supposed to be opposites. And this is an important point to some feminists such as Judith Butler. So as Butler points out, she says that even if these expectations change, which they do change over time, it doesn't mean that it's okay for women to be masculine. Society never really gets rid of those boundaries, what's feminine, what's masculine. They might redefine what feminine and masculine is, but it's never the case that women are allowed to be masculine. That no matter how much she says the gender roles might change and the norms might change, it never becomes the case that women can be masculine and men can be feminine. That society keeps those separate, even when, for example, they let women wear pants or something like that. And she lays this out in something she calls a heterosexual matrix, which is that it has three components for her. This is what she thinks society holds up. Most societies have this sort of structure, what she calls it, which is called the heterosexual matrix, and it's supposed to reinforce the norms of heterosexuality. So under this, gender must express sex, so again, males must masculine and females feminine, and maleness and femaleness, as well as masculine and feminine, must be opposites. Also importantly, it also espouses the view that heterosexuality is natural, and that's what it's supposed to be. So she says that this matrix is socially constructed and is based in a gender hierarchy. So it organizes social institutions and expectations that support the gender framework and the correct role for men and women. So it ensures that men will stay masculine and women feminine, even if the definitions of those terms might change a little bit over time. And so Foucault argues that this whole idea of sexuality also is not natural in the way that people think it is, which is kind of an extension of or related to Butler's point, which is that, look, the idea of this bifurcation of sexuality itself is a societal invention. He says we have certain desires to do certain things, we categorize those as sexual, but that's just because society tells us to. And then we categorize ourselves with these labels like gay and straight, and that those are just labels for stuff that could not have a label. It's a made-up distinction. So he says to argue that heterosexuality is natural is just to misunderstand what sexuality even is, that it's not natural, it's just a societal construction that we put around these things that we do naturally want to do. So he's not saying that we don't naturally want to do certain acts that society tells us to call sexual, but it's that that labeling is the societal construction, and that if it weren't for that, we wouldn't have to make these particular acts. We wouldn't have to put them in that category. They could have been put in a different category. They could have not been put in a category at all. So the categorization of certain things as sexuality in itself, he says, is not a natural thing. It's just a societal invention. So again, going back to this idea of what makes someone a woman then, or a man, most feminists agree that women do share the property of being oppressed. There are widespread oppression, but the question is that enough to make somebody a woman, and is that what we want to say make someone a woman? Because again, if it does, then it seems that transgender women are not legitimate. But Sally Hesslinger doesn't necessarily want to make that point about transgender women, I don't think, but she does say that women are defined by their subordinate role in society. So a person is a woman if they're subordinated based on biological features they possess or which people think they possess, which are associated with the female role in reproduction. So it's not that they're women because they have certain biological traits, it's that they're women because people put them in that role because they think they have those. Whether they're right or not doesn't really matter. So if you are oppressed because of your perceived biology, then you're a woman according to her. So on this view then, if feminists were to succeed in eliminating the oppression of women in society, then we would not need the category of women anymore, which is kind of might seem strange to people. But some people have made the same point, including her, about race, and that it's that racial categories are just a product of oppression. That like people are defined as a certain race based on their observed or imagined bodily features that people think that they have, or or might assume that they have, and then that is used to justify their subordinated or privilege depending social position. So again, it's not about the biology anymore at all, it's about what people perceive. And Gail Rubin kind of takes this whole idea from a slightly different perspective. She says that the biology came in and that women were always traded by men in a transactional kind of a relationship, and she points to weddings this way and says that women were traded to different tribes in exchange for money or cattle or political reasons, all these reasons. And she says that these kinship systems are built up around the oppression of women, and she points to traditions like the father giving away the daughter during the marriage ceremony as being a last vestige of that kind of kinship trading of women. In psychoanalysis, she points out, has traditionally been seen as steering people into their correct roles, what they see as their correct roles. So Freud has this whole theory about how women, females, develop to desire men, even though they might not naturally do that, just to push them into their societal roles, and that psychoanalysis is supposed to be about helping them do that. So according to Rubin, Freud isn't necessarily explaining biology or the naturalness of sexuality, but rather how society kind of encodes men and women to embrace certain roles or pushes them into those roles. And again, like we saw with Butler, Rubin thinks that this oppression and this psychoanalysis and all this pressure is supposed to is part of creating a system that prioritizes heterosexuality and tries to keep women in their place. So that whole heterosexual matrix thing that Butler proposes, that she says society has, is the same thing. It's this idea that we're going to make sure everybody plays their proper role, and heterosexuality is the proper role. So according to Rubin and Butler as well, heterosexuality isn't really natural, because if it were, and if we were all biologically programmed or inclined to desire the opposite sex, then these systems of oppression, this kinship system or this heterosexual matrix or whatever you want to call it, wouldn't be necessary. It would be just like, it's like you don't have to force people to eat, right? You don't have to tell people that they need to breathe, because these are things that we're just inclined to do. And so their point is that if heterosexuality was the same way, we wouldn't need this whole system to sort of push people to do that. They would just want to do it anyway.